Good afternoon, peeps. This is my first video. Um, Not my first video ever, but it's my first video as an ex-Jehovah's Witness. And I just wanted to, as briefly as possible, talk about my story. And hopefully you're going to see, because I've watched a ton of stories on YouTube, how all of our stories really have a lot of similarities in them. A lot of things that we all have experienced are in a lot of ways very much the same. It's almost weird to me as I watch so many of your stories on JW Struggle, JW Survey, and all the other random stories that I've watched. That's what amazes me, and it actually builds my confidence that I've really made the right decision. So here it goes. So I was raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. My parents became witnesses prior to 1975. They had me in 1982. And they never really talked much about the whole 1975 thing, probably because they were somewhat embarrassed about it. So it wasn't until I was in my 20s that I actually, for the first time, even heard of the 1975 prophecy and the lack of fulfillment of such prophecy. But anyway, my childhood was pretty good. I had fun. I had a lot of good friends in the hall, and I was a very outgoing child, so I made a lot of friends outside the hall too. That was something that didn't please my parents too much. They were pretty strict witnesses. We didn't miss any meetings. We didn't miss service. And my parents were strict about my association, but I went to public schools, fortunately, which allowed me a measure of freedom to meet a lot of good people. There's a lot of good people out there that aren't Jehovah's Witnesses. And so in that aspect, my childhood, I don't look back on it with regrets. Sure, as a kid, did I like getting up on Saturday morning and going out in service? No. Did I look forward to the meetings? No, I looked forward to when the meetings ended so I could play with my friends. I was a normal boy. Anyway, as all of you know, it's there's a lot of pressure to get baptized when you start entering those preteen and early teen years, and there was no different with me. My parents constantly were asking me, so when are you getting baptized? And then there would be friends in the hall and friends of my parents that were always asking me if I was going to get baptized soon. So eventually as a kid, you want to make the people you look up to proud. So you go ahead and you do what's going to make them happy. So I got baptized when I was 13. It was in 1996, March 2nd. Big blizzard that day. We showed up at Buckingham Assembly Hall, and that place was empty because, I mean, we got probably a good foot of snow that day. By the time the baptism rolled around, I looked around and it was full, but I always remember that day because of how much snow we got, how long the ride took. A funny story, just real briefly. I actually was embarrassed to get changed in front of all the older brothers, so I kept my underwear on, which ended up obviously getting wet when they baptized me. And as I'm walking to the car to like take my swimming trunks and my t-shirt back to the car, I could feel like my underwear freezing from how cold it was. And I sat the rest of the day in wet, frozen underwear underneath my suit. Nobody knew that at the time. I told a couple of my close friends later, and we got a nice laugh out of it. In any case, as soon as I got baptized, an interesting thing happened. I always loved sports, especially basketball. My dad had built me a court, and so I played as much basketball as I could every day, probably. Rain, snow, cold, heat, it didn't matter. I played. And then I played as much as I could in school. And then if I could, I would sneak and play with worldly kids or play with my witness friends from the hall. So that was probably the thing I enjoyed most as a kid, and I was quite good at basketball. I received a lot of pressure from teachers and other players to play on the high school team. I even had kids show up at my house, and of course, I wanted to play. I would always tell them I want to, but my parents aren't going to let me because I'm one of Jehovah's Witnesses. However, I wouldn't say that to my parents. I just went along with it. So my mom, she loved the idea of me getting parts and all that. It was something that made her proud, and I get that. So we had the circuit overseer over one time, and she goes on to tell him that I've been receiving a lot of pressure to date and to play sports, and that I've been really good about turning it down. I kind of, in my head, I just rolled my eyes like, okay, Mom. So he right away perked up. Oh, I have an part coming up in the next assembly. Do you think you would be okay to do an interview? And of course, I'm not going to say no, so I did it. And I went up there and I lied in front of everybody that, yeah, I turned down playing sports because I want to put the kingdom first. Obviously, I didn't say it like that. I was very enthusiastic. But in my head, I'm like, I really want to play basketball. So I had still actually had some measure of hope that maybe one day they would change their mind. And so we had this brother that was new in our hall, Pete Bethune, and he was a state trooper. He was a huge guy, 6'8", 250, in great shape. He was in his mid-30s, so he was probably around the prime for most guys. And he played college ball. So he came over one day and he said, I'll play you. We played. I ended up beating him. I was shocked that I actually beat this guy because of how big he was. And the first thing I did was go and tell all my friends in the hall, hey, I beat Pete. And as soon as they heard that, they didn't believe me. They went back to him. And, of course, he comes back to me. He's like, hey, I hear you telling people that you beat me in basketball. I said, yes, I did. And he goes, well, I was just playing with you. So this time I'm going to play you for real, and we're going to see what happens. So I said, all right. And I was scared to play him the first time. So this second time, I'm like, oh, man, he's really going to wreck me. Well, I end up beating this guy worse the second time than I did the first time. And he actually gave me his state trooper jersey. It was a number 14. I wish I still had it. I had it for a pretty long time, and I ended up losing it along the way. But he actually went to my dad and said, your son's really good at basketball. I have a friend that runs a really nice basketball camp. Do you mind if I take him? And, of course, my dad said no. So that's kind of when I gave up hope that, all right, I'm not going to play any kind of organized sports. My parents just aren't going to let me. So that was the end of that dream. And from then on, I really tried to focus on all the privileges and responsibilities that come with being a baptized brother in the organization. But I did love girls, and me and my friends in the hall, friends at school, we always were trying to talk to girls, hook up with girls. When I say hook up, make up, I didn't have sex. And I did get involved in looking at pornography too. So all that while I was baptized. It always bothered me, of course, because you're constantly hearing how stay away from worldly girls, or stay away from worldly boys, or stay away from pornography. It's bad, it's bad, it's bad. And so I always had this nagging conscience that bothered me. So eventually I graduate high school, and right before I graduate, actually, they made me a ministerial servant. So now I feel even worse because I'm like, man, I'm accepting being a ministerial servant. I'm looking at pornography. I'm talking to worldly girls. Sometimes I sneak over to their house and make out with them. I can't believe that I just got appointed as a ministerial servant, but I was too ashamed to tell anybody, so I just went along with it. And when you become a ministerial servant, that comes with more responsibility, more parts. And I like doing parts. I do. I really did enjoy giving talks and all that. And then right out of high school, I pioneered my first year. It was a really good year. I had a lot of fun, met a lot of cool people. Had a really good friend from Brazil that I pioneered with, Leverson, and we had a great time. He ended up getting this fellowship later. I don't know if he's reinstated or not. And I also went to school with another guy that I became probably best friends with, Evan. And there's more about that later, but we became really good friends. So anyway, After a year of pioneering, I decided I need to make some money. I don't want to pioneer no more. I would still auxiliary from time to time, but that was it. And then in 2004, Evan's sister, I met her. And now she was married at the time to Steve, who I was also friends with. Well, I didn't know this, but Lauren had been checking me out at one of the meetings that I didn't even know she was there. And then she was out in service a few times with us, and she talked to me a few times, but I thought nothing of it. I was just like, oh, Evan's sister's nice. And then we became kind of closer. Like, we would meet for early morning service and this and that. And that started raising some red flags because we started spending way too much time together. And at first, it genuinely was innocent. Like, I had no intentions of doing anything with Lauren, and I at the time, I didn't think she did either. In any case, one night, I remember I was up in my parents' attic laying on the floor, and we're texting back and forth, and then she calls me, and she's crying. And she just starts going on about how horrible her marriage is. She didn't tell me what was horrible about it, just that she was unhappy with Steve and everything. So I felt bad, and I tried to be like comforting, but I can tell you right now, it was an awkward situation for me. I tried to hide that, and I don't know if it came through with her, but I did try to hide it. In any case, one thing led to another. We got closer, and we ended up sleeping together. And so she was a couple years older than me at the time, and she ended up getting disfellowship. I ended up getting publicly reproved because I told the brothers that I would stay away and that I hoped that her and Steve would work it out. And I can honestly say that I really did want that to happen. Lauren, on the other hand, I wasn't in any of her meetings except the one where we all met. And I don't recall much from that except that one of the brothers was asking really stupid questions. That's all I really recall. And that her brothers were actually a lot more rigid than the brothers that I had in my congregation. In any case, I don't know what she told the brothers, but apparently she made it quite clear that she didn't want to stay with Steve, and she ended up divorcing Steve even though he was willing to forgive her and work it out. So, me and Lauren, while she's disfellowshipped and I was publicly reproved, we end up still seeing each other, but nobody knows. My parents, her parents, nobody knows. I end up getting my own apartment. I'm not even friends with Evan no more, which really upset me. I really felt bad about the pain that I caused his family and himself and Steve, of course. And I lost Evan as a friend for a little bit. So we're having sex the whole time she's disfellowshipped, pretty much. She would stay at my apartment. I would stay at her townhouse. We would sneak it. We never got caught. It was bad. I felt bad about it. And she ended up getting reinstated about 2 years later. Obviously, she wasn't honest. Otherwise, she wouldn't have got reinstated. And then a couple months after she's reinstated, we got married. And even though nobody was comfortable with it, they all kind of went along with it because we were pretty determined to do what we wanted to do.